landed. Okay, we'll go ahead and call this meeting. I'm just looking right now. I know we have Marty on hand. Okay, Tom's here too. That's great. Okay, so I'm tracking. We minimum have a quorum here, so we can go ahead and get started for that. First thing I'd like to do is make a move the motion to approve today's agenda. Can I have somebody move
So
a motion,
moved.
please?
So moved.
Thank you. Somebody second?
Second.
Thank you, Tom. All those in favor of today's agenda, say aye.
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 Great. And we have none opposed, so this motion is approved to adopt today's agenda. Okay, second thing I'd like to do is motion to approve the minutes of our governance committee meeting that was on 19 August. Could I have somebody move a motion for that, please?
So moved.
I will obviously second with the caveat that I was not in attendance, but as we've identified previously with Jody's assistance, it's okay for me to do that. Just feels weird.
Great.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Marty. Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Okay, great. Okay, motion is approved. The minutes are approved. Before I go, first, I'd like to express support and hopefully a fast recovery for the JEA lineman that, as I understand it, yesterday, the line maintainer was injured in a arc flash incident. And so hopefully he's recovering okay, and he and his family are doing fine. So they'll be in our thoughts and prayers for that. Okay, proceeding on. Just a quick comment on the plethora of documents we have. If you look on the agenda on section 2 here, you can see we still have the same amount of documents. One caveat, just on item H, the JEA Board Policy Manual, just so everybody understands, and I think it's clear, this is the 16th February 2010 edition. So this one is the old one, the actually currently approved one, but this doesn't reflect any of the changes we made or so far. So that's just the original one that we're going off of. And then if you notice on the section 3 on part A, you'll see that there's a JEA Board Policy Manual clean version and then a red line version. And for today's discussion and actions, we're going to go ahead and use the red line version so that everybody can see what changes were made, comments, etc. Now, I know this is pretty busy, but I think it just facilitates everybody seeing what all the input has been so far on that. So that's the version we'll use to facilitate the discussion on that, just so we're straight. Okay, for today's meeting here, we have several objectives. The first one is to go final on the policy category 2, executive mandates. Now note, this was formerly the executive limitations, but then after some great work by Steve Tooten's team and folks, we got rid of the double negative format, which really was confusing. And this made it a lot clearer. So that's why one change is we're calling it mandates instead of limitations. Second thing is to go final on Appendix 1 with the CEO core competencies and the CEO core evaluation criteria. And when I say go final for both these items here, that really means that hopefully we'll come to agreement today to then at the next JEA full-up board meeting, go ahead and brief these proposed changes for their approval. And the next thing, we'll review the initial comments and edits made on policy category number 2, the board management delegation. And then we'll review the initial comments, edits on the JEA bylaws. And then finally, we'll look at discussing the JEA board evaluation criteria sample for that. So that's where we're headed on this. And if we can go right now to the Madrika or D, I'm not sure who, if you can bring up the red line version of the policy manual, please. And we'll wait for that to come up. And then actually, if you can go to the policy category 3, executive mandates portion. And I believe that's on page 251. Okay, great. Okay, now again, the first thing on this one here, after our last discussion, last meeting, it was real confusing on using the double negatives that Chair Baker brought up. And so Steve Toot and his team did a really fantastic job on revising this so we get rid of the double negative thing, as we're calling it, the executive mandate for it. And then if you also notice the policy title, General Executive Oversight and Assurances instead of the constraints. And quite honestly, I think this, if you look through it, this really clears up a lot of the confusion that we were experiencing when we were going through it last month through this. Okay, if you could you go to page 255 and it's 3.4.2. Okay, great. Now, so it was brought up last time on 3.4.2 about the budget transfers in excess of $5 million without board approval. And back then we weren't sure if that was in compliance with Article 21. And I looked through the current draft of Article 21, and right now there's no sum that's stipulated that dictates anything on that. So I think this one here, we'll leave it up to for the full board to approve. But right now, there is no guidance or constraint from the Article 21 charter on what this amount should be for budget transfers, $5 million. So, and I know Chair Baker, you're on. Any thoughts on that amount from your point of view, sir?
No, I think that's probably fine. It's you know, as I mentioned, that seems like a lot of money, but maybe not in the scope of the whole organization. And you're just transferring, you're not adding. So I'm okay with it.
Right, exactly. Okay, good. Okay, if you go to page 259, please.
Brandon, does anyone else having issues with the sound?
Not that I'm aware of. All the sound is coming in loud and clear. Jody, are you having some difficulties?
It's just that there's a double recording. It's like it's being played back what's just been said over top of someone speaking on my end.
Give me 1 second.
I can hear that when you were speaking, Jody, but that's the only time I heard it.
Yeah,
Jody, if you're playing the through your audio speakers of your laptop, that would occur. I'm not hearing any other feedback. If anyone else appears to have feedback, please chat me in today's window, or go ahead and, if you're a part of the board or the governance committee, go ahead and reach out to me. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're okay right now, Landon. Jody, can you hear us okay?
I can. I apologize. It was playing through my speakers and on my phone, so that's why I was getting the feedback. Sorry, it was on my end. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Okay, continuing on 3.7.3 here, as far as the promote compensation philosophy, et cetera, that paragraph reads, just again, I checked with the Article 21 draft right now, and I don't see any conflicts with what we're seeing here, and then also with what the guidance is in Article 21. So I think we're good on this, unless anyone else has an issue with this. I think we're okay on this provision here with 3.73. And I'll just stand by if there's any comments on this one. Okay, none heard. Good. So really for this portion of it on the executive mandates, that's really the do-outs we had discussing it. So let me just ask to see if anybody else has any comments on this before I ask for a motion to go ahead and bring this to the board for full approval, and I'll just stand by for Marty or Tom or Chair Baker too.
I just want to thank you. This is a lot of work, and you've been very comprehensive. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that, Marty, and believe me, there's been a lot of help on this, quite honestly. So I appreciate everybody's help on this. As Chair Baker said, this is the third pulling of the wisdom tooth of 4, so we're getting there slowly but surely. But we'll get there on that. We're using Novocaine, Chair Baker, put it that way.
General, this is Tom. I think it's outstanding work. I really appreciate all the effort that's obviously gone into it. The only thing that comes to my mind as I think about this and total compensation and executive packages, et cetera, was the consulting contracts that were sort of embedded apparently in or the guarantee thereof that were embedded in the employment agreements previously. And is there anything we need to do here to prohibit that from recurring?
Yeah, great point, Tom. And in fact, we'll talk about that when we talk about the, I think it's the third item when we go over, the board management delegation, in fact, and which will come up here shortly. And yes, we definitely need to talk that. So we'll get to your point there shortly on that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Also, this is Dr. Haley. Isn't it also in the city charter too? They made comment about not allowing that in the city's charter or the draft version.
Yeah, exactly, Leon. Good point. And again, we it's not in the current version, our red line version, but literally we can do a direct lift. And again, I'll review what the Article 21 calls for. It's pretty comprehensive on what compensation limitations and constraints are, and that's one of them too. And we'll address that shortly. Okay, so with that, what I'd like to do is ask for to move a motion to go ahead and present the executive mandates category 3 portion to the board for their approval at the next board meeting. If I could have a motion for that, please.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, nothing heard. Okay, great. So we'll present policy category 3 executive mandates to the board next week, in fact, for their approval on that. Okay, thank you. Okay, next item, we'll go for final approvals, Appendix 1, CEO core competencies and evaluation criteria. And if I could have, please go to page 272. Okay, thank you. So with these, again, we discussed these in detail last meeting, and bottom line is we trimmed these down to, one, make it trackable so that we as a board can track these core competencies, and just as important that a CEO will be able to see what's expected of him. And again, to quote Chair Baker, we got this, I think, down to where this is feasible for a mortal human being to be capable of doing, where the previous version, it would have been Superman, I think, trying to do this one for that. A couple clarifications on this. If you could go to page 274, please. Okay, great. And this is just minor, but let's see here. If you can scroll down a little bit more, please. Okay, great. So you see where it says provide board members preparatory material early enough to properly digest. Then it says leads other effectively. Leads other effectively is supposed to be a new category. Okay, it's not a bullet underneath the actively supports board directors. So just a administrative edit we need to make on it. But leads others effectively is a brand new category for that. And then we had the same thing on page 275. If you can go to the next page.
Real quickly, before you leave that, if you would, provides the material with enough lead time to properly digest. Should we just stipulate a number of days? Because that's a little eye of the beholder. I'm not sure exactly quantitatively how much time to digest is. Maybe it's leave that so that that's clear that that's the intent, and then say materials distributed to board members at least X days in advance of the meeting.
In one of the documents,
Yeah, no, great.
we said at least a week, because I pointed that out
Right.
too in one of the versions of this, but maybe not this particular segment of the document, but I know we talked about it.
Yes, that's correct. We had at least a week preparation for that. And if everybody's okay, we can go ahead and get that in this portion here. I think like Tom suggests, just to make sure it's clear. Okay. Any other comments on this page at all?
Small point, Mr. Chairman. It says provide board members preparatory material instead of material.
Right. Okay, thanks, Chairman Baker. Make that change.
As it relates again, so they're under the both communication and integrity section, somewhere in the intersection of that. The notion of completely and accurately providing performance data and information to the board members. Again, just reflecting back on at least what seems to me from prior experience, there was an incomplete picture or data that were being somewhat manipulated to tell a particular story to the board. And again, I'm just wondering, do we feel as though we have in these responsibilities adequate protections built into that to ensure that it's clear to the CEO that it's their responsibility to provide all of the information comprehensively and accurately?
Yeah, good comment, Tom. And that is that's actually covered in the governance actually section, which we'll talk next committee meeting on, where it does stipulate that the CEO is responsible, that he and his staff are providing, basically, I'm paraphrasing, truthful data. And if they do come across a mistake, something that was said, and then it's an error, then immediately come up on comms with us to inform us that something was mistaken or missaid, et cetera, on that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay, any other comments on this Appendix 1, the core competencies at all? Okay, and then if you can go on to the, if you just go and scroll down a little bit where we have the CEO evaluation criteria. I think it's on, it might be on the next page. There we go. Okay, now again, here the idea was to keep these fairly succinct number-wise, the number of criteria. But again, these will tie in, especially for the first one there, once we get to the policy category 4, the measures of effectiveness, where we go through the key performance areas and performance indicators, et cetera. But again, the idea here is for the board to be able to focus fairly efficiently on what we want to evaluate the CEO on without having to go through multi-pages of stuff. And if you can continue to go to the next page, I think there's a few more criteria, if I remember right. Right, so now granted, these are a combination of objective and subjective criteria. Especially you get into the subjective, some of the subjective areas when you look at the core competencies which we just reviewed on it. So the idea here is I think it gives us the flexibility to highlight key competency areas when we get into a more subjective mode, but then we also have enough objective criteria here, which will make it, I think, easy for us to evaluate the CEO and for the CEO to know what he's being evaluated on. So I'll pause for any input or thoughts on this criteria here.
Yeah, Joe, I wonder if there's a way to identify, diversity in this evaluation criteria. We talk about the workforce, but I just wonder if we can say that where the CEO drives a diverse workforce. And I really would like to pull safety forward ahead of some of the things that are, and I know this isn't in a priority, but the reading material is candidly, in my opinion, something that might come to the bottom of this evaluation criteria and pull forward things like safety and diversity.
Sure, Marty. Now we do have, so the diversity, so if I hear you correctly, then for the evaluation criteria, highlight diversity because we have it in the core competencies, but I think if I understand you right, to put the more emphasis on it, have it in the core evaluation criteria?
Yeah, I would. I know we've addressed it previously, but if in the evaluation criteria, I'd like to see diversity brought forward, safety moved higher up in the listing. I think that would take care of it.
Okay, sure. That's easy to do. Okay, any other comments at all? Okay, great. So on this portion here then, what we can do is make the appropriate clarifications for 7 days in advance for board material, so that gives board members time to digest. We'll make the spelling correction on the material thing, and also Marty's comments on pulling safety forward in the board evaluation and the criteria at a higher priority than including diversity back into that, so it gets special emphasis for that. Any other things on that, or is everybody okay with this? Okay. Okay, great. So that said, what I'd like to do, if everybody's okay, my colleagues are okay, is still go ahead and move a motion to approve this. And again, I'll go ahead and work with Steve's team to incorporate this into the current draft, so it's ready for the board to see with these incorporated.
So moved.
Great. Second.
Thank you. Second. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Great. I think we have a majority on that. Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, if we could, let's see. Let's go to the category 2 board management delegation portion, please. And I believe that's page 239. Okay, we need to go to 239, please. I'm sorry, 243. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, on this one, the big changes made was really getting rid of the ends and means phraseology, which again, we discussed last time, which became very confusing, quite frankly. And the other part too, as you read through this, it really restricted our ability to evaluate the CEO because the we were only allowed to use actually the ends as was worded as a criteria, and it really restricted us into using, I think, more effective means for evaluation. And so the idea here is get rid of the ends and means because it was confusing. Ends is now the measures of effectiveness, which is category 4, which we'll discuss next week for that. For example, if you notice on page 245, you can go there. On 2.2.3, there is an example where you can only use the ends for CEO performance and not deviate from that. And so let me just throw this, ask for any comments on that, because that's generally where the direction of the major editing was on this portion of the board management delegation, was to get us, more flexibility in being able to evaluate the CEO. And I'll pause here for any comments. Okay, if you can go to the next page, please, 246. Now, again, here, if you see 2.3.1 all the way through 2.3.4, it's basically all X'd out. And the thought here was it was just too damn confusing, bottom line. Again, a lot of the ends and means phraseology used, which sort of was confusing and nondescript. And I'm not really sure what value added these series of policy sub-bullets were. So that's why one proposal was just delete them. And I'll stand by for any comments on this portion. Okay. If we can go to page 248. And then going along the same train of thought, 2.4.1 through 2.4.5, again, a lot of overly restrictive, very confusing, and it's just complicating the heck out of what board management delegation I think we're trying to articulate, and a lot of redundancy also. So again, in an effort to keep this trackable and less confusing, the thought here is just delete this portion here, and I'll stand by for any comments on this part.
The lack of comment means that I support your efforts. I don't want you to think that we're not responding or you've lost us. It just is, you're right. This was super confusing.
Ditto.
No, no, I appreciate that, Marty. And again, folks, I understand this is where, I know it's like being in the dentist chair. And so there is no easy way of doing this, but I appreciate your patience in this too. Okay, if you could go to page 250, please. Okay, now this gets to it says see Article 21, obviously, for the compensation, but what I propose we can do is, again, literally just lift key elements from Article 21, the specific sections 2108 and 20 B and E actually says what it is. And let me just real briefly read what the draft Article 21 says. The managing director shall have no outside employment or business. He or she shall be a graduate of an accredited college or university and have at least 5 years executive experience within the utility industries. And then further, the contract term, including renewal term, should not exceed 5 years. The amount of severance pay, if any, shall not exceed amounts allowed under Florida law. et cetera, et cetera. The contract shall not contain a mandatory consulting separation and transition or similar agreement that is triggered due to managing director's termination of the contract. The contract shall contain provisions that the managing director serves at the pleasure of JEA members and may be terminated with or without cause. All compensation terms shall be reasonable and customary and similar to other public utilities comparable to JEA. And the contract must be reviewed and approved as to form and substance by the City Council's Office of General Counsel. So those are the general provisions for compensation here. And I think that addressed, Tom, your earlier concerns, if I remember right. So I think if we just incorporate those key elements, we should be in sync with City Council on this, and then also I think in sync with what we're thinking as a board too. And I'll just pause for any comments on that.
Mr. Chairman, is it clear in your mind that this would allow us to have a bonus program with the CEO?
That's a good question. And off the top of my head, no, it's not clear to me, Chairman Baker. So that's an excellent point on it. And I'm sorry for pausing. I'm thinking, I thought I saw something like that in another part, but I can't remember. But we need to look into it. That's a good point.
The comments is in there that is usual and customary for other leaders probably gathers it, but since there's been conversation about it, I think we'd be smart to be specific.
Yeah, good point, Chairman Baker. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think there may be something in the charter changes that takes out the ability of providing a bonus to the CEO because he's under contract. And I'm going to try to find that language while you guys continue. But I think there may be a suggested charter revision that would exclude the CEO from the bonus program. But let me check real quick while you guys continue.
Okay, thank you, Jody.
Mr. Chairman, this is Paul, if I may. With respect to the terms of the contract, and specifically, we addressed may terminate for cause or without cause. One of the significant challenges in the past history was the standards or the standard for cause termination. And I'm wondering if we can at least think about delineating sort of what was done and what might be more normal and customary in terms of for cause termination. The bar was established so high, and quite frankly, the way that this document is currently written or drafted, it would still allow for that bar to be established at extraordinarily high levels, almost to the point where the incumbent would have to be convicted of a felony in order to rise to, for cause termination. So we can work on some language if that makes any sense.
Paul, I think there's some language in Section 21 specific to that.
Okay, I'll circle back and look at that, Mr. Make sure.
Yeah, Paul, if I understand it correctly, though, so you're looking at language that better articulates cause or termination for cause, correct?
Yes, and not to be directive or specific on that, but at least that the standard should be, at the mid-range of acceptable standards, not stretching. And maybe Jody can help with the legalese in terms of this, the bar for the company, for JEA to pass for a for-cause termination with the past management team was the highest level anyone could imagine, let alone from what I've experienced in 40 years of business. And so it was intentionally structured that way. And again, it was approved by OGC, et cetera. So in essence, just about took that lever away from the board.
Okay, I got it. I understand. Okay, yes, we can yeah, definitely look into that. Okay, any other comments on this? Okay, if we can go to the page 216 and talk about the JEA bylaws. Okay, for a couple things here. So although we're going to talk governance process at the next committee meeting, you'll notice that the proposal is to move the bylaws into the board policy manual and specifically put it under category 1, the governance category. The thought here is I'm not sure why we want to, bylaws are important, but why we maintain it separate. Something could be said, now we just got more documents out there, which might make it harder to keep track of. So proposal for one starters is incorporate it into our board policy manual and stick it underneath the governance process for that. And then if you can go to page 218. And a couple things here. When they start talking about, and it's section 5, I believe. So up through section 1 through 4, it's pretty standard material that really isn't a surprise, I don't think, to anybody. When they talk about the secretary, and Marty, this is where I'm anxious to hear your comments. Just one, I found this section very confusing. I'm not sure what, for example, the secretary shall cause the minutes to be kept. I don't know what the word cause means. Number 2 is be responsible for minutes during the meeting and inclusion in the minute book. I never heard of a minute book, so I don't even know if it exists unless somebody knows about it. But the other concern I have is it really feasible for the secretary, who's a member of the board, to be able to do all this stuff, which seems pretty admin intensive, as opposed to maybe just having oversight and being able to call upon, I would think, somebody within Paul's team who can, make sure that the minutes are recorded properly, et cetera. And so that's sort of at least what I thought were some concerns on this. But Marty, I'm not sure if what your thoughts on this is.
I applaud the direction of oversight versus scribing away during the meetings. And I will tell you, having served as secretary in a previous administration, I did not execute the expectations of that officer level at the detail that's described in section 5. So I would applaud changing it to oversight as you've indicated.
Okay, that's got it, Marty. I'll make that note.
And Mr. Chair, can I make a suggestion on the inclusion in the minute book? Could we change that to that it's published in the public record? Because that's really what, from a statutory perspective, the minutes are to be published into the public record. And we do keep the minutes but not necessarily in a book, but more in a filing system per se. That they've been published. I mean, that's really one of the requirements by the statute.
Sure, Jody, that's too easy to do.
Yeah.
Question, just for my clarification, who the heck keeps the minutes? Like right now, who's keeping track of our minutes?
And so the executive secretary is typically the one that provides them and then publishes them and provides them to the secretary for signature. So it's the executive assistant to the board that typically keeps them.
Okay, got it. And I mean, they do a fantastic job. I just never knew who the heck was really doing that. So I appreciate the clarification.
Behind the scenes.
Exactly. The ones who make it happen. Correct.
Right.
Okay, could you please go to the next page? And I know Chair Baker had a comment on the executive committee earlier, and I'm trying to figure out why an executive committee is needed. I'm not sure why. It seems like another layer of bureaucracy within the board of directors. But I don't know, Chair Baker, do you have any comment? Maybe I'm missing something on the necessity of an executive committee.
You and I are on the same wavelength. I feel like with a 7-person board, having an executive committee kind of makes some members more special than others. And it just doesn't feel right to me.
So in the
past,
I can give a little historic perspective. There was an executive committee, but it was typically, oddly, a committee of the whole. The only time I've served, which was 4 years, the executive committee met in advance of the board meeting in the sunshine. But we always, for 4 years, met as a committee of the whole. So your point is well taken. I'm not aware that we've ever convened an executive committee. I don't know that the minutes indicate that we have, because obviously that would have been done in the sunshine by other boards. And I think the only time you would need one, Mr. Chair, is I'm just thinking through if there was an issue with the CEO, maybe you would want to convene the executive committee before the board. But again, in the spirit of the sunshine, it's kind of silly because any board member would get the notice of that meeting.
Was there obviously was some reason for having the executive committee meeting before the board meeting. Am I just missing something, or is it just the way it was done?
I would prefer to not answer that question.
Okay.
I think that I'll just, Paul, I mean, are you okay with me not answering that question?
Yes, I think so. I think I would just say that the executive committee met and it was an open session. It was a free-form dialogue, but it predated sort of the official board meeting. And I think through time, it's been more appropriate to incorporate those discussions in the formal board meeting as opposed to before that.
Okay, the other thing I'll point out too, the board always has the option if there is a need for a special meeting, and Jody, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to be in the governance section, which we'll discuss next meeting. You can go ahead and convene a special committee if there's a special circumstance that arises too. So, should that need arise, the board always has that ability to convene a special committee with the appropriate folks, whatever the appropriate issue is too. I think I have that right. Is that right, Jody?
That is correct. And in the bylaws, there's the ability to call for special meetings if the chair can call for it, or a certain number of members of the board can call for a special committee meeting. So I don't know that it's necessary to have this executive committee provision in the bylaws. There are some governments and some organizations that have executive committee that go in executive session, but our sunshine laws require us to have our shade meetings are very prescribed by statute. So from an executive committee perspective, as a committee as a whole of the full board, I don't think that this is necessary anymore in these bylaws.
Yeah, I would support eliminating section 1.
Marty, I'm sorry. Do you mean section 5? Wait.
Well, the executive committee on this page is section 1.
You're right. Got it. Exactly. Okay. Okay. In fact, if you go to the next page, where Article 5, Section 3, that's where, special meetings. I think that's what Jody was just referring to. For special meetings. So that gives us the flexibility when the need arises.
Yeah, and the chair has the power to convene, a special committee or special meetings. And, I think that gives us enough latitude to conduct our business.
Right.
Joe.
Okay. Sir.
One above that, teleconference and video conference meetings. It says that if you're having a video conference, that you've got to be able to view every person at the same time. Is that still in there?
Is each other at the same time.
And we don't always do that. Like right now, for instance.
Yeah, good point, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think common sense here is, if you have the video capability, fine. The big thing, as long as folks can hear and track what's being said, as opposed to a Hollywood Square seeing everybody at the same time.
But it does say, as long as you hear everybody at the same time, you're okay too. Right? Unless I'm reading it incorrectly.
It's see or hear. So
it may hear, or if by video conference, see and hear.
So if it's a video conference, it has to see and hear.
Correct.
Right. That's how I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can clean that up.
Yeah.
Roger. Okay, good point. Any other comments at all? Okay, and Jody, let me just ask you real quick. Again, I think we're assuming it's okay that the JEA bylaws don't need to be a separate document, but you expect any issues with that, or can we go ahead and incorporate it into this, into our board policy manual?
Yeah, my only caution on that is if someone needs to just see how we're conducting business from the bylaws perspective, how we're conducting our meetings, and we have to provide them the entire document. That would be my only caution. If there's any reason why we have to give our bylaws out separately from the entire board policy manual. But as long as we just keep them segregated in the one document, I think I'm okay with that. It's just, again, a cautionary. If someone's just seeking how we conduct our business in the meeting realm, we have to provide them the entire, however many pages it turns out to be, governance manual.
Okay, I understand. Okay. Next, if we can look at if you can pull up the board evaluation criteria, the sample survey. And that's going to be, so I'm sorry, Madrick or D, who's ever doing this, that's separate from, that's outside the red line version of the policy manual.
One moment while we look at that document. Thank you.
Okay.
Page 318.
confirm, this is
Okay,
what you're
great.
looking for?
Yeah, thanks, Landon. Yes.
Not a problem.
Okay, so here, again, I want to thank Paul. Paul McElroy is able to come up with this, and sort of a sample self-assessment form on it. Because again, Article 21, as we'll see, we are supposed to do a self-evaluate or board evaluation. The proposal for one is, from a periodicity point of view, do it annually for starters. In the past, I'm not sure, Paul, maybe you know, I don't know how often the board evaluation was done, but I would think maybe at most semi, but probably annually is more appropriate. But what was done in the past, do you know?
In the past, when it was done annually.
Okay. And then if you look, if you can please scroll down a little bit. So again, I think this is a pretty good list here. It's not overly, overly prescriptive. And I think the idea here is make it user friendly for the board members to be able to fill out. A couple things that I think we should include among these the criteria here is maybe consider adding a bullet, something to the effect, understand JEA's measures of effectiveness so that we can do an accurate assessment or get accurate snapshots of how JEA is doing. And then the other suggested addition is understand the CEO evaluation criteria in case there could be some, measures of effectiveness that may be confusing that'll inhibit our ability to evaluate the CEO or something like that. But I sort of thought of those two to add in.
Joe, I would add, board meetings and just add the bullet committee meetings as well, because obviously that spills over into committee meetings. Having been involved in a CEO transition, one of the most important things the board needs to do is be involved in the succession plan. We were actively involved in that in the past. So I think strong working relationship with the CEO, maybe you could add there or add a separate bullet and work in conjunction with the CEO for succession planning.
Okay, Marty.
And then general comments. I think that I'd like to see, if possible, recommendations for the coming year. Any ideas that we would have to improve the process.
Okay. Paul, let me. So, I assume, or Chair Baker too, or Marty, and anybody who's had experience. So, who processes this form? Is this would Steve Tooten's team sort of process this, or how would that work? And then, how would feedback back to the board on this self-assessment work? Is there a third-party facilitator, or is somebody? I'm just not sure how that works.
We've done it a variety of ways in terms of whether it's been Steve's group from a compliance standpoint, audit standpoint, and they've got the confidentiality of the ethics hotline, et cetera, those capabilities within the group, and to then assimilate the data and produce it back more in summary form with a range of answers. We're not looking to, I think, in terms of at least initially the readout, while all of it's public, the initial readout and presentation is sort of a range of answers to see where the board is on various questions. And if we see a very wide range, then I think that has led to a conversation between the board members in terms of, how different views are on that topic, and how we can move towards something that brings us together and make the improvements as Chair Lanahan had suggested through recommendation. The other, sometimes we've used in terms of coordinating and tabulating this is general counsel in terms of Jody or a representative from general counsel, which gives some board members a little more sense of security in terms of their comments and being open. I would say though that, you know, given where we are in terms of the open records, any comments and any evaluations would certainly be public record. I think summarizing them and presenting it in sort of a range of answers allows the board to have, I think, a more constructive and efficient dialogue. So it's really at the pleasure of the board in terms of which direction. I think Steve's group is certainly capable, certainly has confidentiality nature. They have more resources, and Jody and OGC is another avenue.
I'd be fine with
Okay, thanks, Paul.
audit doing it, and I think they should probably work at the pleasure of whoever the chair is at the time. So they would present their summary to the chair, who would then put it on the board agenda. That's my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Marty. Any other comments?
Yeah, General, this is Tom. So, it talks about comprehensive orientation and following industry trends. To me, and maybe speaking for myself, an active responsibility to seek continuing education, and as a board, some way that we are actively responsible for continuing to educate ourselves, and in conjunction with JEA leadership and other appropriate sources. But I mean, there is such a vast universe of information to understand about this industry, particularly for those of us who are not insiders. And so, to me, we can do better in terms of articulating the board's responsibility to educate ourselves and maintain continuing education so that we can properly discharge our duties.
Great point, Tom. In fact, yeah, that's a great point. And I know in Article 21, there's sort of this similar language of what their expectations are, the board members too. So, yeah, we can definitely incorporate that. Hey, Jody, let me ask you, so Tom's comment here, in certain sections, there was this, it reads like a field trip. I'm not, but like a offsite for board members to help enhance their education, et cetera. But again, when you think about sunshine law adherence and all that kind of stuff, is that really feasible? Because and I don't want to sound like offsites are non-productive. They can be great venues to help self-improve, get current on stuff, et cetera. But I'm just wondering, how feasible is that when you have to consider sunshine laws? Any thoughts on that, Jody?
Yeah, if it's educational opportunities, conferences, any type of an educational program, 2 or more of you attending is not problematic as long as you don't talk about JEA business. So, yeah, that's always the key issue. But if it's a conference or something that that multiple members would like to attend, it's one-way communication that you're getting the education, but it's not necessarily that you're discussing JEA business. So always just keep that in mind. But it's not problematic and from that regard. But if you do go out to dinner and you start talking JEA business, that's when you run into issues from a public notice sunshine meeting perspective. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for clarification, Jody, for that. Okay. Any other comments on our first go around with this? Okay. Okay, next one, and I think this might be the last part here, is the for the Article 21 JEA Charter. the bus. And I don't know if there's a, Landon, there may be a document to pull up for that. Yeah, there is. And then, Paul, if I'm oversimplifying this, please let me know. But just for the committee's situational awareness, bottom line is Councilman Boylan's put out timelines for the omnibus refinement bill, which includes obviously Article 21 on that. And what I'm reading is by December 8th is the target date for the council to do final action and adoption of, among other things, the Article 21 charter for that. So with that, one ask from the council is that as a board, we wait for going final on our board policy manual until after that charter's been approved on 8 December. And quite frankly, that sort of nests with the timeline that I foresee with the Governor's Committee on being ready to go final on this with the board's approval. So I don't see any issue with that date. Now, the only issue I do see is if by chance the city council slips on the 8 December, and then it's going to be a while before they have an opportunity, I think, to do that. And if we run into that issue, then what I would recommend, what I'm asking the committee to think about, is we go ahead and in December approve our board policy manual, and then it's always going to be a working document. And if we need to revisit it after the charter's been approved eventually later on, then so be it. But I think it's important that we're able to have this board policy manual, out, in December. Again, we'll just keep in mind if the Charter 21 isn't approved, then we can, if we have to update or whatever, then so be it. Now, I don't know if that's, Jody, I guess I'll ask you first. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Yeah, I think that's fine from a timing perspective. I think this, again, as the bill moves through, as whether or not there's going to be changes made to any of the charter provisions that we're trying to be consistent with in our board governance documents, just being mindful of that, as the process goes through. But I think your plan is well thought through, and I think that's how we should proceed.
And then, thanks, Jody. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Paul, and I would agree with Jody. I would think that if the council's not done with their work on the 8th, and then we move to approve the policy document, as long as in that approval we recognize that we will immediately open and make adjustments to whatever changes occur from that point forward, I think the council will be fine. I think you're in good shape with that recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Paul. The other thing I should tell that I forgot to mention was right now on the 19th and 20th of October, I will be going before the TEU committee and also the council rules committee, letting them know where we're at basically on our board policy manual, and more specifically just what actions we're taking to ensure transparency and also adherence to Article 21 too. And right now, I don't foresee any issues with that because I'm pretty confident that we're doing all we can and making sure we're staying nested with Article 21. So I don't foresee any issues with any of those two meetings that go in October for that, just so that my colleagues have situational awareness on that. Okay, I think, Paul, unless I'm missing anything else, I think that was all that needed to be discussed on for the City Council with respect to this milestone timeline. Is that right?
I think that's right. Got it all.
Okay, great. Okay, I think right now we've covered what the agenda calls for on that. What I'd like to, real quick, is just ask the committee members, and for that matter, Steve Tooten's team also, who's, again, doing yeoman's work on supporting this. Just, I think we're doing okay with the red line version. using that as the main source here to track our changes, et cetera. But just if anybody has any comments on the process to date of where we're going with this effort on getting the board policy manual, if you have any recommendations or changes or something, obviously let me know, and I'll just pause for a second to see if there's any comments on if we can be doing something better with this.
Mr. Chairman, this is Steve Tootin. I think I can speak for probably Delisa too. I think she's actually taking the minutes today. We've been taking copious notes. So I think we're going to try to get these updates into the board package. We want to, we'll probably loop back with you pretty quickly after this meeting to make sure we've got a comprehensive list of all the desired changes.
Okay, great, Steve. I appreciate that.
And I had a question as to the way it's presented. Reading, I confess I like to touch paper reader. This is a lot of paper to look at on a computer and really tie together. Is this going to be presented to the board as a red line document the way it was presented today, or is it just going to be the clean document?
Yeah, Marty, good question. And what I propose is that we present it, the clean version, and then just highlight through what the major muscle movements of what we did to improve the board policy manual. My thought is, for the most part, the great news is we have a lot of board members, with John listening in, and then the four of us, and sometimes Bobby Stein listens too. My impression is a lot of our fellow board members are already pretty up to date on what we've been doing on it. So this won't be catching them, first look when we go for final board approval on it. The second part is for example, on the next committee meeting is to, again, we'll show the clean versions, but just show the specific categories, not bombard everybody, walking through the whole manual, just the portions that today we made motions to go ahead and present for board approval, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
Through the chairman to Ms. Lanahan, Steve Tootin again. I think one thing that might be a good supplementary document along with the clean version of the board policy manual will be that summary of the key edits. We've been tracking that, the staff and the committee. And so that's in the package. And so I think that'll be a good way to say, okay, we've captured the essence of the key changes on that spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Tom Van Ossel.
Good point, Steve.
And Marty, I don't know if you can see what I'm holding up, but it's today's board book. So you're in good company relative to being I like to touch paper reader and highlight and underline and all that kind of stuff. And that sounds perfect. But that's kind of what was in my mind too. A clean document with a summary of material changes as a companion document would be a lot cleaner way to look at it from my perspective. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Tom. Good comment. Okay, so before I adjourn, just very quickly, so for our next governance committee meeting that we'll look to do in October, we'll look at going final on the Category 2 board management delegation and also the bylaws portion, which we discussed today, and then we'll do our initial discussion on a Category 1 governance process, and then the Category 4, the measures of effectiveness for that, and then possibly go final on the JEA board evaluation criteria, but we'll see. The good news is I think after this coming board meeting, pending any no issues or whatever, we're halfway through the board policy manual rewrite. Again, we'll keep the Article 21 in our heads to make sure we stay nested, but I think we're progressing pretty good on this. And again, I appreciate everybody's help on that. So with that, unless there's any other comments, I think we can adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, folks.